Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Kosuke Kobayashi. Kosuke is a investment analyst at AP Ventures. AP Ventures is very well known, I guess, in the hydrogen industry and specifically around the pioneering work they've done around investing in technology, specifically with a huge list of successful companies that you've backed. So welcome, Kosuke. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Nadeem. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
I've followed your conferences and events, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. You're going to be speaking at one of those said conferences coming up. I think next week is World Hydrogen UK. So you're going to be lending your expertise to that event at 9th, 10th, and 11th of April in London. Maybe for people that don't know, maybe you introduce your background and also specifically AP Ventures.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nadeem, for the intro. My name is Kosuke Kobayashi. I'm an investment manager with AP Ventures. Um, AP Ventures is a hydrogen-focused venture capital fund based in London. We invest across the hydrogen value chain, so it includes traditional hydrogen technologies like electrolyzers and fuel cells and hydrogen storage units, but also we invest into derivatives of hydrogen, such as ammonia, sustainable aviation fuel, and methanol. Um, and so we're really taking one step further in electrification, and then converting that into molecules to decarbonize sectors that are to abate emissions.
Yeah.
Um, and within that organization, so my role is to make investments, support the companies that invest, and hopefully lead them into a successful exit.
Excellent.
Um, yeah, and I've been with the fund for the last 5 years. And prior to joining the fund, my background is primarily in commodity and finance and mathematics as an undergrad study.
Yeah. I guess it's worth pointing out how long AP Ventures have been active in hydrogen because how long has it been? You were certainly one of the pioneers from when we started.
Yeah, it goes back over a decade.
Yeah.
So we were originally a corporate venture capital within a large corporate,
Mhm.
and those assets were spun out to form AP Ventures in 2018. So
Yeah.
while the fund itself has been independent for the last 6 years, the investment time horizon predates that.
Yeah. And what are some of the more sort of famous companies that you've backed?
Um, I think obviously there are no favorites within our portfolio, but some of the ones that are making some of the headlines perhaps are more frequently than the others are companies like Hydrogenious out of Germany, Infinium, which is a sustainable aviation fuels company out of United States, Zero Avia out of United States of America, which is manufacturing hydrogen aviation fleets. Um, Amogy, which is an ammonia cracking company out of United States, predominantly focusing the mobility market, such as maritime and heavy duty trucks. And
Yeah.
then yeah, and the list goes on. Yeah, the list
And
goes on.
how's the focus sort of changed over the last few years? You've obviously mentioned derivatives and e-fuels and methanol. Yeah, what are some of your thoughts around how the market's been evolving?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Um, so our mandate, our thesis is to invest into technologies which are addressing specific pain points within the hydrogen um, value chain, which would then allow the takeoff for the hydrogen economy. Um, and perhaps I could answer your question in two ways. So one is, there's a realization that hydrogen is going to be expensive, and we always knew that. But in order for the hydrogen economy to take off, you need to have an off-taker of those hydrogen, which would allow the supply chain of hydrogen technologies, electrolyzers, and transport units to mature. And what does that early market look like? And in our mind, these are markets that could absorb the high cost of hydrogen. So it's either there's a consumer willingness to absorb that cost, and some of that, for example, could be things like green steel, where we're seeing a lot of automotive OEMs willing to pay the premium for that green metal. Um, the other alternative is sustainable aviation fuel, where in Europe it's going to be a regulated market. So the airlines will have to have a portion of sustainable aviation fuel. And we think those are going to be some of the early adopters of hydrogen. And that's where we're definitely seeing opportunities. And in terms of evolution of sort of hydrogen technology startup landscape, I think there's been at times of really hot a lot of interest. I would say after COVID in 2021 and 2022, there was probably more capital than there were deals. And then I think that's starting to slow down a little bit. And you can see that in statistics provided by companies who's monitoring VC investments in general. Um, and so what that meant is it's not that there is lack of capital, but I think it's taking a bit more time for companies to raise capital. Investors being more cautious with their investments, um, and being more selective.
Yeah. And in terms of the environment, I mean, yeah, you mentioned it's challenging, and I think it's always been pretty challenging for startups to be active in the energy sector, because they're competing with a huge industry. It's tough to scale energy. There's a lot of physical. It's not like scaling tech in the sense of IT technologies. What are some of your thoughts about how and what are some of the mechanisms your companies have been successful in scaling?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and we're at an interesting crossroad. So as you said, we've been doing this for the last 10 years, and as a result of that, some of the portfolio companies we have matured quite significantly. And the challenges are is that they are mature technology, but then it needs to be deployed into a project setting. And because it is one of a first of a kind project, it is very hard to attract investor capital.
Mm,
It is difficult to attract traditional sort of banking mechanism. And so you have to come up with a creative way to make sure these projects get developed. And I think that is a challenge, not just within our portfolio, but across the sector, as you mentioned, as these clean tech sector, specifically hydrogen, is maturing, and they're going to need to overcome that. And I'm optimistic that there will be solutions and there will be positive outcomes. One of the portfolio companies that we've invested into, Infinium,
mm,
um, they have their technology is being mature. They have a 50 barrels per day plant of producing e-fuels, and they're in the process of building a plant which is an order of magnitude larger. In the process of doing that, they were able to attract capital from number of investors, most notably Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, backed by Bill Gates and other notable investors. And they were able to put together a structure where it wasn't just the capital that they've invested, but they worked on a structure, um, supported them with offtake negotiation with American Airlines and Citi, which made it investable for other parties as well. And
mhm.
so I think it is a challenge, but it is a challenge that can be addressed with enough motivation and determination
Yeah.
and some creative thinking through the investor side.
Yeah, in terms of, I guess the creative thinking there is to access pools of capital that can be made available if you structure the deal right. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
the classic barrier has always been, banks not taking technology risk, and it's that scale up journey and how do you create some sort of stepping stones. And get to the point where banks are happy to support maybe a third or a fourth or hopefully a second
Hmm.
um, rollout of the technology once it's been proven at more than pilot scale, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, well, what are your thoughts sort of going forward? Are there areas you're looking at specifically? I mean, you mentioned your role specifically looking for new companies to invest in. What are some of your sort of focuses going forward?
Yeah, so in terms of areas of focus, as I mentioned, we are targeting sectors that are going to enable the growth of the hydrogen economy. And by that, we think sectors like sustainable aviation fuel, green steel, where it's going to be the first off-takers of large quantity of hydrogen, is interesting. And I think we need to make sure that takes off and there's technology risk. And we our mission is to address that through our investment capital. And I think more broadly, as I mentioned, venture is cyclical. There is times of a lot of appetite. There's times of less appetite.
Mm.
And then think, you know, our mission is to be consistent and then make sure that there is a um, that we have investor capital where we can invest into promising technologies, um, and so that it can go continuously go through the growth curve, for them to help achieve net zero by 2050.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, it's being consistent. It's being there and being able to identify the right investment opportunities
yeah,
and then have a track record so that we can continue to attract investor capital to continue to fund
yeah,
active going forward.
yeah. And not be cyclical in the sense of I guess being fashion led. I mean, you've been there at the beginning, and you're going through this wave of, I guess, interest, and you're still going to be there in 5 years' time, unearthing new bits of IP that are going to help, bring us down the cost curve. Excellent. Well, it's been fascinating to talk to you. We look forward to your contribution next week, indeed, World
Mhm.
UK, and indeed the wider scope of the work that you're doing, which is of critical importance, and pushing companies up the TRL, and breaking new technologies. So many thanks, Kosuke. Thanks for chatting to me today.
Thanks, Andy. Likewise. Have a great
Cheers.
day.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.